The sun was sinking low over the wide frontier, painting the open land in deep shades of orange and red when the chase began. Dust rose high into the air as a hard-riding posse thundered across the plains, their horses pushed to the edge of exhaustion. The men rode with grim faces and tight jaws, driven by anger and fear, shouting orders and curses that echoed across the empty land. Ahead of them, barely visible through the swirling dust, a wounded Comanche warrior struggled to stay in the saddle. Blood stained his side, dark and heavy, soaking into his clothing as each painful movement pulled a low groan from his chest. Every breath burned, yet he forced himself forward, knowing that stopping meant death. The posse had one goal, and mercy was not part of it. They believed the man they chased was dangerous, someone who did not belong in their world. To them, he was only an enemy, a symbol of all they feared about the wild frontier. Their rifles were ready, their hands steady, their minds closed. The sound of hooves beating against the dry earth filled the air, growing louder with every passing moment. The Comanche warrior glanced back once, his dark eyes sharp despite the pain. He knew the land well, every rise and dip, every stretch of grass and stone, but even that knowledge could not fully save him now. As the chase continued, the land itself seemed to watch in silence. Tall grass bent under the wind, and distant hills stood like quiet witnesses to the unfolding drama. The warrior's strength was fading fast. His horse stumbled, slowed by exhaustion and fear. The wound in his side throbbed, sending waves of dizziness through his body. He pressed a hand against it, trying to slow the bleeding, but his fingers came away slick and red. Still, he rode on, driven by instinct and the will to survive. Behind him, the posse closed in. One man fired a shot that cracked through the air like thunder, missing its target but sending a clear message. Another laughed harshly, confident that the chase would soon be over. To them, this was not just a hunt, it was a matter of pride. The frontier was harsh, and they believed it belonged to the strongest. There was no room for weakness, no space for understanding. The warrior's horse finally faltered near a small rise in the land. With a painful cry, the animal slowed to a stop, sides heaving. The Comanche man slid from the saddle and nearly collapsed as his feet touched the ground. His vision blurred, and the world spun around him. He could hear the posse now, too close, their voices sharp and cruel. Panic rose in his chest, but he forced it down. He looked around quickly, searching for any place to hide, any chance to escape. Not far ahead, he spotted a small, lonely house standing against the vastness of the plains. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney, a sign of life in an otherwise empty world. Hope flickered inside him, weak but alive. With the last of his strength, he staggered forward, each step heavy and painful. The sound of the posse grew louder, hooves pounding like a drumbeat of death behind him. As he reached the edge of the yard, his legs gave out. He fell hard to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. The pain was unbearable now, spreading through his body like fire. He tried to rise but failed, his strength finally gone. The shouts of the posse were almost upon him. Dust filled the air, and shadows stretched long across the land. Inside the house, someone heard the noise, the distant shouting, the thunder of hooves, the sound of a body hitting the ground. The moment hung heavy in the air, full of danger and choice. The frontier had always been a place where life and death were decided in seconds, and this was no different. Outside, the wounded Comanche lay still, caught between hope and fear, between survival and the end. The posse was closing in fast, their intentions clear. And yet, standing between them and their prey was something no one expected, a chance for mercy in a land ruled by violence. What happened next would change everything. The woman had lived on the frontier long enough to know the sound of danger. It was not just the thunder of hooves or the angry shouting carried by the wind. It was the feeling that crept into the chest before the mind could fully understand. She stood near the small window of her house, her hands still from the work she had been doing, her eyes fixed on the open land outside. The plains were usually quiet at this hour, broken only by the wind or the call of distant birds. But today, the silence had been shattered, and she knew something terrible was coming. She stepped outside slowly, her boots pressing into the dry earth. Near the edge of her yard, she saw him lying there, a Comanche warrior, wounded and barely moving. Blood darkened the ground beneath him, and his breathing was shallow and uneven. For a moment, fear froze her in place. She knew what helping him could mean. On the frontier, kindness could cost a life. People talked, and talk led to violence. Helping a man like him could make her a target, not only for the posse chasing him but for her own people as well. In the distance, the sound of horses grew louder. The posse was close. She could hear their angry voices now, sharp and full of hatred. Her heart began to pound so hard it felt like it might break through her chest. She looked down at the wounded man again. His eyes opened slightly, dark and tired, filled with pain but also something else, hope. He did not beg. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, as if placing his life in her hands. She turned her head toward the horizon, where dust clouds marked the approaching riders. Every instinct told her to step back, to retreat into her house, to close the door and let fate take its course. No one would blame her. On the frontier, survival came first. Yet her feet did not move. Instead, her mind raced with memories, of loss, of loneliness, of how harsh this land could be. She knew what it meant to be hunted by life itself. The shouting grew closer. There was no more time. Her choice had to be made now. She knelt beside the wounded warrior, her hands shaking as she touched his shoulder. He flinched slightly but did not pull away. "You can't stay here," she whispered, though she knew that was not true. He could not move. He would not survive another minute in the open. Suddenly, she heard a gunshot in the distance, followed by laughter. That sound cut through her fear and hardened something inside her. Without another thought, she made her decision. She wrapped her arms around the wounded man, surprised by how heavy he felt, and dragged him toward the house. Each step was a struggle. Blood smeared across the dirt, leaving a trail she prayed the posse would not notice. Inside, the house was small but sturdy. She pulled him through the doorway and slammed the door shut behind them. Her breath came fast and uneven as she lowered him to the floor. The warrior groaned softly, his face pale and drawn. She could hear the riders now, close enough that the ground seemed to tremble beneath their horses. She acted quickly. She dragged a rug across the floor, pulling it over a loose section of which she had once used for storage. With effort, she lifted the board and guided the wounded man into the shallow space beneath the floor. He looked at her with confusion, then understanding. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling him to stay silent. He nodded weakly. Just as she replaced the board and straightened the rug, loud fists pounded on her door. Her heart nearly stopped. She stood up, forcing her face to calm, forcing her hands to stop shaking. When she opened the door, several armed men stood there, dust-covered and angry. Their eyes searched past her into the house. "Did you see a Comanche come this way?" one of them demanded. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "No," she said. "I've been here all day." The men stared at her, trying to read her face. Every second felt like an hour. Beneath her feet, a wounded man held his breath, his life balanced on her courage. This was the moment when fear and mercy collided, and there was no turning back now. The moment the woman spoke the lie, the air inside the small house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. The men of the posse did not believe easily. Their eyes moved slowly from her face to the dark corners of the room, searching for signs she might be hiding something. Dust clung to their coats and boots, and the smell of sweat and gunpowder followed them inside. Outside, horses snorted and shifted, restless and eager, as if they sensed blood nearby. One of the men stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. His boots struck the wooden floor hard, each step sending a dull echo through the room. Beneath that floor, the wounded Comanche lay hidden, his body pressed against the cold earth, his chest barely rising. Every sound above him felt like a hammer striking his skull. He clenched his teeth, forcing himself to stay silent as pain tore through his side. The woman stood near the door, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She kept her face calm, though her heart was racing wildly. She knew the men were dangerous, not only because of their weapons but because of their certainty. They believed they were right, and that belief made them cruel. One wrong word, one sign of fear, and they would tear the house apart. "You're alone out here?" another man asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Yes," she replied simply. "Just me." He narrowed his eyes and glanced at the table, at the chair pulled slightly out of place, at the faint streak of dirt near the door. The woman noticed his gaze linger there, and her stomach twisted. She forced herself to breathe slowly, reminding herself that fear could be seen just as easily as truth. A third man laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Funny thing," he said. "We tracked him straight to this spot." Her chest tightened, but she did not step back. "Tracks pass through here all the time," she said. "This land don't belong to anyone." The man took another step closer, invading her space. She could smell the sourness of tobacco on his breath. "You sure about that?" he asked. Beneath the floor, the wounded warrior felt warmth spreading from his wound. He pressed a hand against it, trying to stop the bleeding. His breath grew shallow, and spots danced before his eyes. He could hear the voices clearly now, every word sharp and dangerous. He knew that if they found him, they would not hesitate. Yet even in his pain, he understood something important. This woman was risking everything for him. One of the men crouched suddenly, his hand brushing the rug. The woman's heart nearly stopped. Time seemed to slow as he lifted the edge just slightly, peering beneath it. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world hung on that small movement. Then a shout came from outside. "We're losing the trail!" The man froze, then let the rug fall back into place. He stood up slowly, annoyance flashing across his face. "He's wounded," he muttered. "Can't have gone far." The leader of the posse turned back to the woman, studying her one last time. His eyes were cold, but there was doubt there too. Doubt could be dangerous, yet it was also her only protection. "If we find out you lied," he said, "you'll regret it." She met his stare without flinching. "I told you the truth," she replied. After a long, tense pause, the men turned and left the house. Their boots faded across the floor, then off the porch, then into the open land beyond. The sound of hooves followed, moving away, though not far. The posse had not given up. They were only searching elsewhere. The woman waited, counting her breaths, listening until the sounds were distant enough that she could no longer hear them clearly. Only then did her knees weaken. She leaned against the wall, her body shaking now that the danger had passed, at least for the moment. She lifted the floorboard carefully and looked down at the wounded Comanche. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, but he was still alive. When he saw her, something softened in his expression. He gave a small nod, a silent thank you that needed no words. She lowered herself beside the opening and whispered, "You're safe for now." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. On the frontier, safety was never certain. The posse was still out there. The night was coming. And the choice she had made would carry consequences far beyond this house. Night fell slowly over the frontier, covering the land in a quiet that felt almost unreal after the chaos of the day. The woman lit a single oil lamp, its soft glow pushing back the darkness inside the small house. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a whisper, and somewhere far away a coyote cried. Inside, however, there was no peace. Beneath the wooden floor, a wounded man fought for his life, and above it, a woman waited, knowing sleep would not come. When the sounds of the posse finally faded into the distance, she knelt and lifted the loose floorboard again. The Comanche warrior lay still, his face slick with sweat, his breathing uneven and weak. His eyes opened when he saw her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Fear, pain, and gratitude passed between them without a word. Carefully, she helped him out from beneath the floor, wincing when he cried out softly. The wound in his side had worsened, the blood dark and thick. She laid him down near the hearth and fetched water, clean cloth, and the few medical supplies she had. Her hands trembled as she worked, but she did not stop. She had seen pain before, this land made sure of that, but this was different. This man should have been her enemy, yet now he lay helpless in her home, trusting her completely. The weight of that trust pressed heavily on her heart. As she cleaned the wound, he clenched his jaw, refusing to scream. Every movement brought fresh pain, and his breath came in sharp gasps. She whispered calming words, though she did not know if he understood them. Still, her voice seemed to steady him. She poured water gently, wiping away blood and dirt, praying silently that the wound was not fatal. Hours passed slowly. The oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring softly in his own language. At times, his body shook with fever, and she feared she was losing him. She pressed cool cloths to his forehead and held his hand, feeling how weak his grip had become. In the quiet of the night, her thoughts turned inward. She wondered how her life had led to this moment. She had come to the frontier seeking a fresh start, yet danger followed her even here. She knew that if word spread of what she had done, her neighbors might turn against her. The posse might return. She might lose everything. Yet, as she watched the warrior struggle to breathe, she knew she would make the same choice again. At one point, his eyes opened wide, and he looked at her with sudden clarity. Slowly, with great effort, he raised his hand and pressed it to his chest, then gestured toward her. It was a simple movement, but its meaning was clear. Gratitude. Honor. A promise unspoken. Tears filled her eyes, and she turned away quickly, unwilling to let him see them. The night grew colder. She fed the fire and wrapped him in blankets, sitting beside him as the hours dragged on. Each time his breathing slowed, fear gripped her chest. She prayed softly, not caring who might hear. She prayed for his life. She prayed for forgiveness. She prayed for strength. Outside, the land slept under the stars, unaware of the quiet battle being fought inside the small house. The frontier had always been a place of violence, yet in this one room, mercy was holding its ground against death. Near dawn, his breathing steadied slightly. The fever eased, and color returned faintly to his face. Exhaustion washed over her, but relief followed close behind. He was not safe yet, but he had survived the night. As the first pale light of morning touched the window, the woman finally allowed herself to rest, if only for a moment. She leaned back against the wall, her eyes closing, her body aching from the long night. She did not know what the day would bring. She did not know if the posse would return, or if danger would arrive in another form. All she knew was that the choice she made had tied her fate to his. And with the rising sun, that choice was about to bring consequences she could never have imagined. The morning arrived quietly, almost too quietly, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Pale sunlight slipped through the small window and rested on the wooden floor, warming the room little by little. The woman woke with a sudden start, her body stiff from sitting upright through the night. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was and what she had done. Then she heard a soft sound, a breath that did not belong to her, and memory rushed back like a flood. The Comanche warrior lay near the hearth, still wrapped in blankets. His face looked calmer than it had during the night, though deep lines of pain remained. She leaned closer, watching his chest rise and fall. Relief washed over her. He was alive. Against all odds, he had survived the darkness. But relief did not last long. On the frontier, morning often brought new dangers, not safety. She moved quietly, stepping outside to scan the land. The sky was clear, wide, and unforgiving. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, offering no place to hide. For a moment, everything seemed normal, too normal. Then she heard it. A low sound, distant but growing. Hooves. Her heart sank. She rushed back inside, her mind racing. The warrior stirred as she knelt beside him. He opened his eyes and followed her gaze to the door. He did not need words to understand. He had lived long enough on this land to know what the sound meant. The posse might be returning, or worse. She helped him sit up slowly. His strength had returned only slightly, but his eyes were alert now. He shook his head, gesturing weakly toward the open plains, signaling that he needed to leave. She knew he was right. If he stayed, they would both die. But when she helped him stand, his legs gave out beneath him. He was not ready. Not even close. The sound grew louder. She looked outside again, and her breath caught in her throat. Riders appeared along the distant ridge, not scattered like a posse, but moving together, organized, steady. There were too many to count. Her first thought was terror. Her second was disbelief. These men were not settlers. Their movements, their posture, the way they rode, it was unmistakable. Comanche warriors. Within minutes, they surrounded the house. Horses formed a wide circle, hooves pressing into the earth, dust rising like a warning. The woman stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. This was not a rescue she had imagined. This was judgment. Or so she believed. Inside, the wounded warrior straightened as much as his body allowed. Pain crossed his face, but pride stood stronger. He reached for a weapon that was not there, then stopped. Instead, he placed a hand over his wound and took a deep breath. Whatever was coming, he would face it. Outside, silence ruled. No arrows flew. No guns fired. The warriors simply waited, watching the house. The woman felt her knees weaken. She had imagined many endings to her choice, but this one was worse than any. She stepped back inside, whispering to the wounded man that she was sorry. Sorry for not saving him better. Sorry for what might happen next. Then a single warrior rode forward. He dismounted slowly, his presence commanding without effort. He looked toward the house, his eyes sharp and knowing. The wounded man froze. Recognition flashed across his face. This was no stranger. This was someone important. The warrior spoke in a calm voice, his words carried by the wind. The woman did not understand the language, but she felt its weight. The wounded man answered weakly, his voice breaking but steady. Their exchange was short, but powerful. The warrior nodded once. What followed stunned her. The Comanche warriors did not attack. They did not raise their weapons. Instead, they lowered them. Some dismounted. Others looked at the house not with anger, but respect. The woman stood in disbelief, her fears slowly turning into confusion. She did not yet know why they had come. She did not yet understand what her kindness had set in motion. But she was about to learn that mercy, once given, does not travel alone. It returns, with consequences no one can control. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout or gunshot the woman had ever known. The Comanche warriors remained still, their horses calm, their faces unreadable. The air felt tight, as if the world itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The woman stood at the center of it all, her house behind her, her future uncertain, her heart beating painfully in her chest. She waited for violence. On the frontier, silence often came just before bloodshed. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she forced herself not to run. Running would mean fear. Fear would mean guilt. She would not give them that. She lifted her chin and stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. The wounded Comanche warrior stepped forward slowly, leaning on the doorframe for support. His movements were stiff, controlled by pain, but his presence changed something in the air. The warriors noticed him immediately. Murmurs passed through them like a ripple across water. Some leaned forward. Others stiffened in surprise. No one spoke. The woman glanced at him, wanting to stop him, afraid he would collapse, afraid this was a mistake. But he did not look at her. His eyes were locked on the men before him, his people. The leader stepped closer, his gaze intense, searching the wounded man's face as if confirming what he already knew. The wounded warrior raised his hand slowly, palm open, a sign of peace. His voice was weak, but when he spoke, the silence deepened even more. Every word mattered now. He spoke of the chase, of the wound, of falling at the edge of death. Then he spoke of the woman. As he talked, the woman felt the weight of dozens of eyes turned toward her. She could not understand the words, but she understood the meaning in his tone. He was telling her story. He was telling them what she had done. The leader listened without interruption. His face showed no anger, no judgment, only focus. When the wounded man finished, he nodded once. Then, slowly, he turned his gaze to the woman. For a moment, she could not breathe. This was the moment everything would be decided. The leader stepped forward until only a few paces separated them. He studied her carefully, as if reading her spirit rather than her face. She met his eyes, her fear giving way to something stronger, truth. She had nothing to hide. Whatever happened, she would face it. He spoke then, his voice calm and steady. Though she did not know the words, she understood the meaning when he placed his hand over his chest and inclined his head slightly. It was a gesture of respect. A low sound moved through the gathered warriors, not anger, not threat, but acknowledgement. One by one, they lowered their weapons completely. Some dismounted and stood with heads bowed. The silence shifted. It was no longer tense. It was solemn. The woman felt tears sting her eyes. She had expected death. Instead, she was standing in the presence of honor. The wounded warrior swayed slightly, and the leader moved quickly to support him. Others stepped forward to help. They spoke softly to him, touching his shoulder, his arm, careful of his injury. He was no longer alone. He had been seen. He had been heard. The woman watched, overwhelmed. This moment felt unreal, like a dream shaped by pain and hope. She realized then that her act of kindness had traveled faster than fear ever could. It had crossed a boundary deeper than land or language. The leader turned back to her once more. He pointed to the house, then to the wounded man, then placed his hand over his heart again. Though no words were shared, the message was clear. A debt had been acknowledged. A bond had been formed. As the warriors began to move, not away but closer, the woman understood something profound. She was not surrounded by enemies. She was surrounded by silence because silence was the only thing strong enough to hold this moment. And in that silence, her fate was rewritten. The leader's voice rose slowly, firm and steady, breaking the silence that had wrapped the land like a heavy blanket. The Comanche warriors turned their full attention to him, standing tall, listening with respect. Whatever he said now would shape what came next. The woman remained still near her doorway, her heart beating fast, unsure if she should step forward or stay where she was. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and now she waited to learn its cost. The wounded warrior was helped to sit on a low stool near the house. Though his face showed pain, his eyes were clear, filled with purpose. He watched his leader closely, nodding once when their eyes met. This was more than a rescue. This was a reckoning. The leader spoke of honor. He spoke of life given when death was easier. Though the woman could not understand the words, she felt their meaning in the way the warriors reacted. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others bowed their heads. A few looked at her with expressions that surprised her, not anger, but respect, even gratitude. The leader then gestured toward her, and a hush fell again. Every eye turned in her direction. She swallowed hard, stepping forward slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving until she stood a few steps from him. The frontier wind tugged at her hair, carrying the weight of the moment with it. He reached into a small pouch at his side and pulled out a simple object, a carved token, worn smooth by time. He held it out to her. For a moment, she did not move, unsure what to do. Then she accepted it, her fingers brushing his. The object was warm, alive with meaning. The leader placed his hand over his chest again, then pointed to the horizon. The gesture was clear. She had protected one of their own. In return, she would be protected. Not just today, but beyond this moment. A murmur spread through the warriors, and one by one they stepped forward, repeating the gesture of respect. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined such an ending. She had only acted on instinct, on compassion. Yet here it was, shaping the future. The wounded warrior looked at her, his expression soft. He spoke quietly, slowly, choosing his words carefully so she might understand at least some of them. "You saved my life," he said. "Now your life is part of ours." The words struck her deeply. She nodded, unable to speak. She realized then that the frontier was not divided simply into enemies and allies. It was shaped by choices, by moments when fear was challenged by mercy. The warriors prepared to leave. They moved with purpose, but without haste. Before mounting his horse, the leader turned back one last time. He raised his hand, palm outward, a final sign of peace and promise. As they rode away, dust rising behind them, the woman stood alone once more in front of her house. But she was not the same woman who had stood there the day before. She felt changed, marked by something invisible yet powerful. The wounded warrior was taken with them, supported carefully, his fate now secure. Before disappearing into the plains, he looked back at her. Their eyes met across the distance. No words were needed. The bond had been sealed. When the land finally grew quiet again, the woman stepped back inside. The house felt different, larger somehow, as if it carried the weight of what had happened. She placed the carved token on her table and sat down, her hands still shaking. She understood now that kindness did not vanish into the air. It traveled. It returned. And sometimes, it came back stronger than fear. Her single act of mercy had created a debt of honor, one that would protect her long after the dust settled and the story became legend.